join us, for example, in North America, where it's still very early, they can listen to the recording. Now let me introduce the presenters for today.
Can you say next?
And we need the next slide for that. Tim Ruffer, our first presenter, is IDET's Director of Strategy and leads the company's work on monitoring and evaluation of private sector development. He is advising programs in Ghana, Nepal, and Ethiopia on the design of their monitoring system and is directing several evaluations of market systems development programs. Adam Kessler, who follows next, is an independent results measurement consultant with a particular emphasis on using the DCD standard for results measurement. He has written guidelines to using the DCD standard in challenge funds and conflict-affected environments, as well as on measuring change in the wider market system. He has experience in enterprise development, trade facilitation, and challenge funds. Last but not least, Michaela Balan is an independent consultant. She has provided technical assistance for results measurement in private sector development, socioeconomic, and governance programs, working in Asia, the Pacific, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Currently, she is assisting the growth and employment in states strengthening business environment, which is GEMS3, and other programs in monitoring and results measurement. With this, I would like to pass the word to Tim, and again encourage everyone to ask questions for the presenters in the chat box.
Thank you very much, Marcus. So I'm going to start off by briefly presenting the overall sort of conceptual framework behind this three-step approach. It's something that I first put together a few years ago when I was asked by the GEMS program in Nigeria, which is a large M4P program with quite a number of different components. So I was asked by them to put together a handbook for results measurement, and in thinking through how to deal with the challenge of attribution, presented this framework, and we'll hear more from Michaela later on in this webinar about how they've progressed on one of the components of GEMS in actually applying this. So I'm looking forward to that. It's not in many ways anything particularly new. I think in its simplest form it combines and brings together many things that market systems programs are doing anyway. And it's also a framework that's been approached, that's been used certainly in evaluating other interventions within the international development where the attribution challenge is equally real. Examples of in budget support, where I've been involved in a couple of evaluations looking at the links between budget support and poverty reduction. Next slide, please. As we all know, and I think the reason why many of us are here today is that in market systems development, we are dealing with a very complex sort of chain between an intervention that we are facilitating and ultimately the sort of impact level objectives which normally relate to poverty reduction or indicators that relate to that in some way. And in between that, what this diagram presents is a very much simplified sort of chain from the M4P strategic framework between the intervention, the market system change that we seek to facilitate, and how that leads to improved growth and access. And as we know, there's quite a lot of complex interactions through this, and simply trying to measure in a single linear direction is often challenging because there's so much else going on, so many other players active within the market system, and things affecting our ultimate impact. Next slide, please. And I think as a result of that, what I've identified is that really there's no single approach that can, on its own, address the many sort of measurement and attribution challenges that we face. What I'm calling bottom-up measurement, which is starting at the intervention and looking at that and the results that it achieves up through the results chain. Particularly when there are lots of interventions that a program is applying, there's sometimes a risk of double counting beneficiaries when you're dealing with the same beneficiaries or aiming to benefit the same beneficiaries across interventions. There's often a risk that things like dead weight loss and displacement are not taken account of, with the benefits that we see have happened anyway without the intervention. That's essentially what dead weight loss is. To what extent, if we see somebody moving into a new job, are they displacing somebody who would have had that job otherwise? Displacement. And various other challenges. But the final one set out there, this sort of big attribution challenge that we face, the big jump between interventions that are often quite light touch and micro, and fairly large sector-wide changes that we're seeking to ultimately facilitate. Starting up at the sector-wide, economy-wide level where we're trying to facilitate change, there are ways that we can measure change there and look to identify the causes of those changes, large sector-wide surveys, other forms of sort of more qualitative analysis, which are often useful, but on their own it's very hard to then, within all the different things that are happening to influence those change, link and attribute them back down to us as market-based facilitators. Next slide, please. So, essentially, what this diagram aims to show is, well, the sort of directions of measurement and what each of those approaches tries to do. One starting at the intervention and moving through to assess what the results are in terms of growth and access and poverty reduction, and the top-down one, which looks at what is happening in terms of poverty reduction, jobs, growth, whatever it is, and seeks to identify the causes of changes that we observe. Next slide, please. And really, the three-step approach is conceptually quite simple. It's combining those two. So it's a measurement process that involves the bottom-up measurement, step one, includes some form of top-down measurement, and then crucially involves the third step, which is bringing those two, the results from those two steps together, and looks at what we can conclude from them. Next slide. So just to briefly talk through what the three steps involve. Well, the bottom-up measurement approach, I think it's been very much, a lot of work has been done on this, particularly by the DCED and through the DCED standard, and I think hopefully many participants will be aware of this approach. Often, certainly in applying the DCED standard, in applying a results chain as a starting point and a framework to assess how interventions have achieved change at the market level, and looks not only simply at what the intervention has done, but does try to analyse how that intervention has interacted with other interventions and market players within which it's working. Next slide, please. Step two, the top-down measurement. Well, what does this really involve in practice? Well, I think there's probably a lot of programs who, certainly if applying the M4P guidelines or certain aspects of that, at the start of an M4P program, there's normally an overall assessment, analysis of a market system within which a program wants to intervene, looking at things like where and how the poor are engaged within that market system, what the constraints are that prevent that market system from working within their interests. So quite often, certainly at the start of an M4P program, we have some form of baseline that has been done there, some form of analysis. And essentially, at its most simple form, the top-down measurement is a continuation of that analysis and assessment over time. So you've done your initial market system analysis of what the constraints are and how the poor interact with the market system. Well, how is that changing over time? Next slide. And just whilst that's coming up, of course, so that's a very simple summary. There are lots of different methodologies that can be applied to doing that, but I won't go into that now. And then, crucially, the step 3, which is really looking to cross-check and synthesize the results of these 2 steps, particularly focusing on the levels at which the 2 steps come together in terms of the market system change that we observe and changes in terms of growth and access. So essentially what we're doing there is saying, next slide please, within step 3, first of all, well, what, in terms of the outcomes and impacts that were targeted by the program or the intervention, what have we actually observed? And so taking a step back from the intervention for a while, for a second, well, in terms of our market analysis, what have we identified as the determinants of those changes, broadly, be they related to the intervention or not? And then using and triangulating with the bottom-up approach, providing the information and analysis that we need to identify to what extent those determinants of the changes were influenced by the program's intervention. Marcus, I'm going to stop there. It's all been quite conceptual, and I think it's time to move on now to hearing a bit about how this really has been applied in practice from Adam and Mahela.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I would like to directly give the word to Adam, who is actually sitting in Nigeria. So we're hoping that the internet connection is holding. And yeah, Adam, thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you Marcus and Tim. So I just had a brief scare as my internet broke and I ran around the office trying to get it back. So just to check, can anyone hear me?
Yes,
yep,
perfect.
Looks like at least some people can. Great. So I'm talking from the Business Innovation Facility, which is, next slide please, I don't think I can control them. Brilliant. So Business Innovation Facility, or BIF, is a DFID-funded M4P program. And we work in Malawi, Nigeria, and Myanmar. And I'm actually sitting in Nigeria at the moment, so the arrow on the left in the map is pointing straight at me. And as an M4P program, we aim to reduce poverty by changing the way that markets work. And the main instrument that we do use for this is technical assistance, coming off the expertise of the first kind of round of BIF. And we're currently emerging from our inception phase, so we're not like far along. We're not at the stage where we're using this fully, but with ITAD helping us set up our M&E system, we've tried to put some of the principles of this 3-stage approach in place from the beginning. And so I wanted to talk about some of the ways in which that is working out for us. Next slide. Brilliant. Okay, so and I think it does recognise a significant issue with market development programs, that the ambitions are really high, but the ways we have to measure an attribute are quite limited. So yes, so you can look at attribution at different levels, I think. And if you go on, Marcus. Yep. Okay. So you can look at attribution at different levels, and the bottom-up measurements is for one which people focus on most. And it's obviously challenging, but we have some ideas about how you can address this. So we follow the DCED standard for results measurement. So we have a results chain as laid out on the right, and we have an indicator for every box, track whether the changes are happening as we expected, and then gather qualitative information to kind of assess attribution of the links. So if a business makes a change following RTA, we can speak to the business. If for example, farmers start using different inputs, we can speak to farmers and ask what the reasons were for that. And we can use quantitative methods of assessing attribution in some areas. So for example, we're running a randomized controlled trial in Myanmar. And I think the issue here is to look for a credible story, not absolute proof of attribution. Can we go on? So, like, there's sometimes, I guess, there could in theory be a distinction between bottom-up monitoring, which is non-systemic, and top-down monitoring, which is systemic. But that's not quite how it works in our project and many others. So in the results chain, you include not just the bit on the left, which is the direct kind of impact of the intervention, but also your plans for expansion or scaling up, which is when other businesses take on the same business model and it becomes more common throughout the market. And I think you can look at attribution for that, again, through a kind of qualitative bottom-up approach by our market managers being continually aware of the possibility of other businesses taking on the business model. And if they see that, going to ask some questions. What motivated the company to take it up? Is it similar to models that we supported? Or does it take advantage of opportunities that we created? So there are elements which you can kind of try and track there. Should we go on? Brilliant. And I think that's where you kind of run into this issue of that's all very well, but it's normally quite limited. And M4P, when you speak about what you hope to do, doesn't just talk about trying to change a business or even a set of businesses, but a whole donut of a market system. So can we go on? And so the first step, like from where we're sitting, is to say, well, if we're going to try and attribute changes to this market system in future, we need to have some way now that we can start to measure them. Because we can look at retrospective measurement in time, but the data sources are normally unavailable, and the reality is if you come back in 4 to 5 years' time, it's often going to be very difficult to see what's changed because these indicators just aren't there. So we've got a number of, the first step we've taken is to take a number of market indicators in each market. And these are based on key changes that BIF expects to see in the market and key factors or assumptions which affect our market strategy. And this doesn't just duplicate the indicators which we collect at the intervention level, but it kind of looks broader. So for example, if it's an intervention level, we have an indicator for sales from company X, then at the market level, we have an indicator for overall sales figures in the market. And I'll show an example on the next slide. So here's an example from the Pico Solar Power market. Pico Solar power panels are just small household solar panels which people use to power a light. And it's a small market. This is in Malawi and it's growing. And so we have a number of indicators down the left. One of them is growth in PSP sales. This is important because we're hoping to influence the growth of this market to expand it over time. Company survival rate is not really something we're influencing, but something which is important to understand the maturity of the market. Going down, proportion of companies that are for-profit or NGOs or social enterprises, which is important because at the moment it's quite social enterprise, dominated, and we're hoping to move it towards a more kind of sustainable commercial basis. Should we go on to the next slide? Okay. So at the moment, this is where we are. We've kind of set up our market level indicators, and we're hoping to track these over time, and that this will allow us to follow the 3-step approach in some way in the future. And this is now thinking ahead slightly to what we might be doing in future, and then Mihaela, I think, will give you a perspective from the other end of the program tunnel. But so in future, we might notice, hopefully, that there's a change in one of these market level indicators, for example, growth in PSP sales, and then this will be a prompt to investigate why. So this can be either investigation from BIF or from an external evaluator. And we're thinking this might actually be quite a good role for an external evaluator to play once we work out if we're having one. So BIF learns, so an example of this would be that BIF learns that improved access to finance was a key enabler of this market growth. Let's say finance for the households to buy Pico Solar Powers. By a happy coincidence, we have an intervention in access to finance, which is developing new business models whereby households can purchase Pico solar panels. And so we're able to kind of compare the two. Does our intervention monitoring show that this intervention was successful in its own right? Does it show there was copying? Does it show that others kind of in the market took inspiration from it? And does it show, for example, that this improved access to finance started to come after we did our intervention? Is there a chronological story to be told? And hopefully this will help us assess attribution for market level change. Can we have the next slide? So the last slide is just to look at some challenges and some suggestions which have come where possible. One challenge is really data availability. So often the data needed is just not available. So we're looking at primary data collection on a simple level, surveys of businesses rather than like big, massive surveys at the field level. But using existing data is obviously preferable. One other challenge, I think, is the limits of BIF's influence. So you need to be realistic about what you can influence in a market. Past a point, it will be impossible to detect any impact. And I think this points to the importance of setting these indicators at the right level, or setting boundaries, as I think complexity people say. So this might involve, rather than looking at the whole market and the whole country, just looking in an area you work in. Or rather than looking at the whole market, look at a single sector, a single kind of supporting function that you're expecting to influence. So looking at the seed market rather than at the P2P market in total. And the final challenge is the interest of market managers. And I think this can seem more remote than normal day-to-day monitoring. And one potential exciting opportunity is to use the data to influence the market. So we're talking in Malawi about using this for a market trends report, which could have a broader benefit, and also using this information to refine market assessment strategies as a kind of quick check on them as we go through our interventions. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. I want to give the word now directly to Michaela, who will talk a bit about her work in GEMS3.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. So what I'm going to do now is basically talk about the experience that we had in GEMS3, a business environment program in Nigeria, using this three-step process. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we work in this program, our approach is basically we try to improve this market system by touching at 3 levels, and you can see this in this diagram. The first level is basically, we call it the landscape. It's the environment level, where the pressure to change the market system comes from. The second level is the market system itself. So in terms of what markets, what systems are we working on in GEMS3? There are 3. It's land, tax, and investment. And then you have the bottom level, which is the niche level, basically where we as GEMS3 intervene, and we design interventions that hopefully successfully will find their pathway to get into the market system. Next slide, please. So this basically is, we call it a multi-level perspective on improving the market system. This kind of multi-level is reflected also in the way we measure and attribute results in GEMS3. And that's why we've chosen this 3-step process. Next slide, please. So what we did, basically, we tried to adopt and adapt this 3-step process to fit better to a business environment program. So in terms of step 1, which is at the intervention level, and for us we call it a kind of micro level that we look at, we use a DCD standard, so we have a result chain developed for each intervention. So what we basically do is follow the chain of changes and measure at these levels, and I put a number of examples in here. So we have activities that will lead to outputs, then what we try to get out of this is that people are aware about these outputs. We also check user satisfaction of these outputs, and to give you an example what we mean by outputs, in GEMS 3 we talk about a law that's enacted, or we talk about for tax harmonization, we talk about a new payment system that we put in place. We talk about a land registration system that we improved in some states. And then we also look at, in the result chain, at direct benefits, and because you are a business environment, the direct benefit is private sector cost savings, so this is PSCS. In terms of other very challenging change that we hope to happen, and this is linked to the tax intervention that we have, is reduce harassment. And also what we are after in this result chain, and we describe it, is signs of growth. We want that enterprises, because of these little improvements in the market system, in the tax system, land system, then they will show a little bit of signs, and they are tempted to grow and invest in their businesses. So apart from this follow the result chain, at this level we also try to understand more the process of attachment. If you remember the diagram before, the niche intervention was basically at the bottom. What we want to see that this niche intervention moves slowly and finds its way in the market system. So we'll be looking at the process of attaching this intervention into the market system, and this is critical for us. How we do at this level, basically we do periodic monitoring, 6 monthly, we collect data and we report against the result chain. Next slide please. In terms of step 2 from Tim's presentation is where we take a kind of, we are in the plain picture, bird eye picture. So we call it environment development level. We go from the top, from the macro level, and we look down at the other levels. So we will be looking if there is any growth in enterprises in that particular state or LGA or area where we work. We will be also looking at reasons for growth, because what we want to see if there is any link between this growth in enterprises and what has happened in the tax system or in the land system or in the kind of investment system that we are working on. Also what we try to do to see if this environment, this level, which is basically the enterprises, if they are still putting pressure for the market system to change to better fit their purpose to grow. And we also, this step, will be looking at direct benefits. So we'll be looking at, if we think about tax harmonization, we will be looking at if enterprises are paying now taxes according to the new law which was enacted because of GEMS work. We'll be looking at private sector cost saving that I've just talked about in step 1, and we'll be looking at other kind of impacts such as reduced vulnerability, again for the tax interventions. How we do that? At this macro level, we do enterprise survey. We sometimes use control and treatment groups. We also triangulate with other information we captured from, we call them business pressure groups. So we do focus group discussions, we do key informants interviews as well. Next slide please. The last step, which is the meso level, the middle one that was in the diagram, basically we start from the middle, and it's a kind of, we call it cross-check and systems, market systems health check. This is what we do. So we try to move up and see if there is any link with what we've noticed and experienced in step 2. We also look down to see if something is correlating with what we've observed in step 1, but also we do a lot of horizontal left and right checking as well. So in terms of how we are checking step 2, we'll be looking at what benefits the systems player. So there are a lot of actors in the system, in the tax system. So we'll be looking at what kind of benefits each system player have experienced. So if we talk about tax harmonization intervention at the LGA level, we'll be looking at IGR, is there any increase in IGR, and we correlate with, you know, what we've captured in step 2, enterprises saying that now they are paying taxes according to the law. So if there is increase in, you know, enterprises paying, more enterprises paying taxes, then we want to see there is an increase in IGR. We call this check still picture lens because it's quite actor-based, system actor-based. The second one is we try to cross-check with what we have collected in step 1. So we'll be looking at the process of attachment. You remember we want the niche intervention to attach to the system. So we'll be looking if, you know, new relationships have formed, you know, in the system because of this new niche intervention. We'll be looking at new functions, new processes. So we'll be checking, we call it motion picture lens. We put our motion picture lens to check what's happening in the system and connect with what we've experienced in step 1. And then the third one is the health check of this new system in terms of the relationship that this new system, this system basically has with other systems, with we call peer system or supra system, that they have to relate to because of the pressure from the environment. So this is the third thing that we check at this level. How we do that, it's a lot of qualitative data that we collect. We do a lot of focus group discussions, key informative interviews, and we have a group that we call eminent group, people, you know, experienced people, well-known, reputable people from Nigeria, which have a strong and view and experience with business environment, and especially with the areas where we work on. Next slide, please. So Adam told you about challenges that he's experienced with this system, the 3-step process. What I'm going to point to here is learnings from this 3-step process. So we've applied this 3-step process already. GEM3 is working since 2011, so we had time to test it, adopt it, and adapt it. So 3 things that I want to mention is, the first one is that you have to be clear what your market system is. Don't take everything, you know, don't take the entire donut. Be very clear what the market system is. However, be aware that it could evolve, so have you know, a rubber, and you might change the border. The second thing is adapt the 3-step process to fit your program and maybe your sector. And also your budget. You know, Adam was talking about RCTs. We didn't have money to do an RCT. The last thing is about that, I think, and this is very, very important, is to focus your effort and resources on the system change, basically the middle one, the meso level, because nothing will continue if this is not stabilized. So you try to introduce something, put something new into a system, rearrange relationships, dynamics of the system. If this is not stabilized, that is not going to be successful and sustainable, and this is critical. And the fourth one, how can I forget? Ask Tim if you struggle, and this is what I did. I think, Tim, it was in March last year when I was struggling to understand how can I use this system, because we wanted to report results using the 3-step, not only 2 steps as we did a year before, and it helped us heaps. So thanks for this. So I think that's about everything in GEM3. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kayla. That was a great presentation. We'll now really go directly into the question and answer session. And as this is the first webinar with a live audience, I would like to give the privilege to the people that are in the room for the first question, and then I will also pick up the questions that came through the webinar. So is there any question in the room?
I have 2 questions. My name is Susan Yugas. Thank you for having us here. First of all, in terms of attribution, I think the credible story approach is very attractive. But there has to be a lot of cross-checking, lots of probing, lots of skepticism about whether a story is not just credible but stands up to antiviral investigation. And my question is how you cope with the idea that an intervention brings about a catalytic change, that it's the missing piece in the jigsaw. How can you prove? You can't then attribute a certain proportion of the change to it as a catalyst. But how do you show that it really was a crucial part of the picture? So that's my first question.
Well, there was already two, no?
No. And the other one is, I think, I'm very interested in the idea of the market analysis approach that's developed under competition policy. There's a lot of interesting material there about what is the definition of a market in competition policy terms. And that rises the idea that stabilizing a market system seems to me very odd, as Michaela has just said. That seems to me a rather odd objective to have. It's the essence of the market that it's not stable, that it evolves.
Thank you very much. Do you have any particular presenter to answer the question, or just in general?
I guess on the last one, the stabilization point, I would direct that to Michaela. The other one, well, Tim, since you seem to be key authority in the field, I'll put that with you.
Well, Michaela, do you mind chipping in and explaining a little bit more with what you meant when you said that the aim is to stabilize the market in a way? I think you're muted, Michaela.
Hello. Okay. So basically, what we mean by this is you have a market system where you have a number of players, you have a number of actors in that market system that are performing a number of activities. What you do with your intervention, basically you introduce a new idea or introduce a new market. So what you want to see, and I will give you later an example from the tax intervention, what you want to see that whatever introduced which is new is basically well received by the existing market players and it fits within the existing market system. So to give you an example, so that in the tax harmonization intervention, what we try to do is there was a payment system before. They were using tax agents. What we did in GEM3, we came up with a new system, the POSs, and that was quite new. That basically completely changed the way the taxes were paid before, and also meant that some tax agents which were initially, involved in collecting taxes, they were no longer relevant for this new system. So there was a bit of pressure from other market players. Why are you putting this on the market? Why are you not stealing the old system? And what we try to do, we try basically to, so what I mean by stabilizing, basically realizing that there is a benefit, there is a win-win situation, and that this new arrangement between the actors, bringing maybe the bank to help also with this POS system was useful, and as I said, everyone won because of that, because of change in the system. So this is what I mean.
Thank you very much, Michaela. With regards to your first question, I would actually like to bring that together with a question that we got from the webinar, which also asks about how can we see whether an intervention is solely caused by a project or whether it's actually just contributing, and what is the difference between these two aspects of attribution and contribution. And this question came from Kustrim Mehmetai. So I would like to give this question to Tim.
Thanks, Marcus. So you're taking Michaela's Ask Tim advice with the tricky questions. I think, yeah, and Susan, both of you answered your questions. I think before I try to answer the catalytic effect question first, the attribution versus contribution question is quite relevant. So I think often these two terms are sort of mixed up a bit. In terms of definition, I think the the distinction is quite clear. Attribution is where we can show that an intervention caused an effect, caused an outcome. It's about a direct causation. Whereas contribution is where an intervention helped amongst a number of other factors to cause an observed outcome. To me, that's the distinction. And I think that in the fields that we work, it's pretty difficult and pretty unusual to say that, particularly in terms of a change that we see in the market system, to say that we are the sole cause of a change that is observed. So I think calls for and the use of the word attribution in this context is pretty challenging. It might be applicable in some contexts, so that at the very lower ends of the results chain, where we can, for example, I think that's true. But if we are truly facilitators in the market system, then our objective is, in many ways, not to be the sole cause. So I think we are talking about contribution. Now, the question of then the extent to which we have helped to facilitate or been a contributor to something that has then catalyzed wider change. It's a tricky question. I think sort of the definitions then do become a little blurred. But I think the point that you picked out, Susan, which is really important, is that often when we're measuring the results and reporting, we're really keen to show and demonstrate the effects that we have. If we do entirely focus on a sort of a bottom-up approach to measurement in its most simple form, we would always be looking for those catalysts and claiming that we were part of that, or we were the catalyst. And that's where it really is important to take a step back, look at the market system as a whole, and see really what is going on more widely and outside of our context. To what extent were firms that were not exposed to that catalyst, at least initially, or that intervention, did we see the changes occurring there as well? To what extent really were we central to the changes? So perhaps it's quite a challenging thing to do, I accept that, but I do think that applying this sort of an approach and the sort of things that Mihaela describes really does help to us to apply that sort of that credible story, that investigative approach.
Thank you very much, Tim. I would like to direct the next question to Adam, because he hasn't had a chance to contribute to the Q&A yet. And this question is coming from BIF's office in London. And the question is, the BIF example explained how the program measures what it expects to see. What about the unexpected? How to pick this up? Often these impacts have strong feedbacks into these expected indicators. Are we drawing the right conclusions if we only measure what we expect to see? It seems to be also a rather difficult question. So Adam, please.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I think that's a really good question. I guess the first thing to note is that the set of indicators are quite broad and subject to a range of kind of interpretations. So if one of your indicators is the growth in sales in the market or the new entrance into a market, you may expect to see it rise, but you'll also detect if it falls, and you'll also, hopefully through your investigation, be prompted to understand why it happened, which isn't necessarily the reason you expect. So by picking useful indicators, hopefully you'll be able to prompt yourself to pick up unexpected effects as well as expected effects, because it's a prompt to investigate why it happens, not just whether it does or doesn't. So I guess that's the first suggestion. And secondly, then I think like looking out for unexpected consequences is I think challenging for many results measurement systems, and an important thing there is just the staff you have and the encouragement they receive to keep an eye out and listen out for changes in the market beyond kind of their narrow intervention areas. So kind of how broadly their mandate is defined, whether they're just implementing a technical intervention or whether they're supposed to be understanding their market as a whole. And if the latter, I think you have a much better chance of picking up unexpected effects.
Thank you, Adam. We have another question here in the room.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. This is Emma from Mercy Corps. My question relates a little bit to David's question there, that talks about the feedback loops that come from the data that we're collecting. It sounds like we're talking quite a lot about measurement from the prove side of the continuum rather than using it for the improving program. And one thing that alerted this to me was, Adam, when you were talking about the interest of the program managers in collecting this data, I think that's a problem that we really have when we think about data collection and the challenges of measurement when you're trying to prove the impact. But as you suggested, when you turn it around so that the information itself has a value to the program, which goes again to if you're sensing things that are happening that are having unplanned consequences, you want to be able to respond to them and respond to them quickly, not just every 6 months when you're collecting data. So just wondering what the experiences are of kind of incorporating this data back into the programming and adapting as a result.
Adam, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, I'll have a go, but I'm sure the others have opinions. So thanks for that, Emma, and I think you're right to highlight the issue. I don't think it's just a improving thing, though. I think like when trying to encourage a team to get excited about monitoring data, the more directly that monitoring data is usable, the easier it is. So when you're, like, in a sense, when you're collecting your bottom-up monitoring, they're doing an intervention, you're collecting data which is relevant to that intervention, so it has a very clear link to kind of normal work. And I guess that's why I was talking about the role of the program team in the last question, not just being implementing interventions, because in that case the market level data actually is of limited relevance, but also with kind of coming up with new interventions and refining the market strategy more generally.
Tim here. Just another response on this, and I suppose it also partly relates to the early question we had from DFID London. I think in its most simple form, what we see on a lot of M4P programs is some really good analysis of the market system at the start of the program. And then the interventions are designed, and then that market analysis is sort of forgotten about. And so, okay, now we know what's going on in the market, we know what we're going to do, let's do it. And I think in its most simple form, what this three-step approach, what I'd like to emphasize in it, is that you need to continue looking at the market system as a whole, and that very much is for the purpose of continual learning and adapting, because the market system is changing as we intervene, and as you said, unexpected things will be happening, either that we are influencing or that we are not influencing, and so that the sort of regularity of that continual analysis. Well, if we're engaged in the market system, we've probably got a feel for what's going on a real-time basis, but perhaps formalizing and redoing that analysis periodically, whatever makes sense to the program, is, I think, a really important step that is often underemphasized.
Thank you very much, Adam and Tim and Emma, for your question. I would like to, well, time is up for the webinar, but as we started a little late because of a technical problem, I would continue with the Q&A session for another 5 or 10 minutes. So I hope most of you can stick around. I would like to direct the next question again to Michaela. And the question was around the manageability of such a system. Obviously, there are many things you need to do. If you have 3 steps, you need to look after the intervention measurement. You need to keep aware of the market and how it changes, and you need to do the whole triangulation and bring it together in step 3. And often projects have not so big teams for M&E. So how can this be managed in a project? This question actually came from John Musantu.
Okay, so how we do data collection in GEMS3 is we have, at the beginning, and this was a challenge at the beginning as well, because the way the program was set up at the beginning was it was an M&E manager, which was myself, and then it was another local person as M&E advisor. But it didn't work. So we in Nigeria we work in 9 states, and Nigeria is big, 150 million. So it didn't work. So what we did, we changed the M&E unit in having basically 2 M&E officers, one for the south states and one for the northern states. And then what we did is the baseline studies. We do subcontract the data collection and do analysis ourselves, or we subcontract everything. With periodic monitoring and impact assessments is always we use enumerators, and we've invested a bit in building capacity of these enumerators, and we are enumerators that we trust. We had issues at the beginning, so we said let's put a little bit of more resources and train these people and build their capacity, and it's a win-win situation. So for them, building skills for us as well. And the analysis is done in terms of monitoring, and what comes out of monitoring and impact assessment is done by the staff. So it's not big cost so far, as I said. This is.
Thank you very much, Michaela. We have another question here from the room.
Hi there, this is Will from Mercy Corps. In one of the early BEAM webinars, we looked at the systemic change framework, Adopt, Adapt, Expand, Respond. I wonder if any of the field practitioners have explicitly used that as part of this 3-step attribution.
I keep the floor open.
Which framework was? I couldn't hear properly.
The Adopt, Expand, Respond framework. AER.
I can say something quickly about that. I think it's a really good question. Probably should have brought it up in the presentation, but yes. And I think that kind of helps draw the link between your initial intervention, where you work with a single company, and the second step of coming from top down, because that allows you to link out from your support to a single company to the change more widely in the market, whether that's other people copying the same idea or other people responding to it by introducing different business models. So I think it has a valuable role maybe in strengthening your bottom-up monitoring, which allows you the third step to be a bit easier. I'm not sure if that's the way to phrase it, but.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Can I add something to this? So for us, basically, we not necessarily don't have AER, but we track systemic change. So we have other framework that we developed for our program. When we talk about, my GEMS3 diagram, the middle one, the meso level, this is where systemic change happens. So this is where basically these kind of things that Adam was talking about, other copying. If we enacted a law in one LGA, then what we hope to happen is that other LGAs or other states to take up this innovation, this new harmonized law, and use it in their state. And what we've noticed recently is that other states, are calling us and asking for drafts of the law, and they want to take it up. So we call this autonomous expansion. So with no support from us, things are happening. So even in the business environment, not only in the value chain, agribusiness, agriculture, it's good science, and we track these kind of things.
Thank you very, very much. I have one last question, and I chose this question. Well, there are many more, but unfortunately the time doesn't allow us to answer all of them. But I chose the last question because this is one question I come across quite often when I talk to practitioners. And the question is actually very simple. Do we need a control group to measure attribution? So is building up a counterfactual the only way of actually attributing change to a program? And this question came here, but as I said, it's often repeated here. It came from Herbert Kire. So I think I'm just going to direct it to Tim for the moment, but I'm opening afterwards for the other presenters as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and incredibly simply put, which is some of those most difficult questions are simple. I think if we think of and define attribution, as I mentioned, where we're seeking to identify direct causation, then in the sort of context in which we are working, where we've got so many, as I mentioned, and we've got so many other factors that are contributing to outcomes that we observe, I think it perhaps is one of the only ways that we can sort of prove that causation. I think that, as many of us will know, the sort of methods that are required to then ensure that we have validity in using a control group or a comparison group are really challenging as well, and that's quite documented, and perhaps that could be another Beam Exchange webinar, simply looking at how control groups can be used in results measurement. It is incredibly challenging, but if we are looking at a proof of cause, then it perhaps is the only way in which we can do it. But I think probably what is more relevant in most of the cases is looking at coming up with a realistic and credible story of contribution, and that's probably what is most helpful to most of us in most cases.
Thank you, Tim. Adam or Michaela, do you want to add to this?
I can add just a few words about us. So business environment, if we talk about enacting a legislation, then you don't have any control group because legislation would affect everyone. So in some cases you don't need, there are other ways to check and claim attribution. So not always control group.
Maybe I wonder if there are two ways to look at a counterfactual, which is firstly as a quantitative statement. Sorry, just checking. Oh, people can hear me, brilliant. Firstly as a quantitative statement of what would have happened otherwise, and if you want to give a kind of a number to your attributable change, then you do need that kind of quantitative counterfactual. But as Michaela and Tim both said, that's not always kind of feasible. And in that case, I think a counterfactual is always quite a useful way to think about attribution, even if you're not putting a number to it. But it becomes far less of a kind of a methodology and more of a question you ask yourself. So about whether your story is plausible.
Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to wrap up the webinar. As I said, there are many more questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to answer all of them. But I would like to invite everyone to our LinkedIn group. We have a discussion group on LinkedIn for the Beam Exchange. I will also ask the presenters to go to this group and continue the discussion, answer questions if they're put to the group, and we'll keep discussing about this very important aspect of attribution. Thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation. Thank you for the people in the room for coming here. We have put together a few resources on our website, so you can go to beamexchange.org and click on webinar, and you find the webinar on attributing change. There you'll find the GEM3 results measurement handbook, for example, and there will also be the manual on results measurement, and the recording of this webinar will also be found there. Last but not least, I would like to thank the three presenters for introducing us to the topic and sharing their experiences with us. And oh yeah, please participate in the short survey. When you leave the webinar, the survey will pop up. So please answer the key questions, and this will help us to make these webinars more valuable for you. We hope that you enjoyed this event with Beam, and we wish you a good rest of your day.